It's been a little while since we've talked about Star Wars, and I don't try and just bring Star Wars up to be negative. Star Wars is something I really do love. I've been going back through the Clone Wars with Jill, and we've really been liking it. But recently, Liam Neeson, actor famous for playing Qui-Gon Jinn, obviously he's played a ton of other characters, but when it comes to Star Wars, he's famous for Qui-Gon Jinn. He actually got asked in an interview if he would reprise his role of playing Qui-Gon Jinn in a Star Wars spin-off, and he pretty much said no, he wasn't really that interested in it. He didn't really, completely dunk on it or anything like that, but there's a comment he made that I thought was really interesting I wanted to talk about with Nate here. Neeson said there's so many spin-offs of Star Wars, it's diluting it to me, and it's taken away the mystery and the magic in a weird way. And I kind of wanted to get the thoughts of the audience on that, and also Nate, because I think he's right. Mm-hmm. I've hit a point where, for me, I don't really keep up with a lot of the new Star Wars stuff anymore, or the MCU. I don't want to insult anyone who does, because there's a ton of stuff I've loved with it and still will love in the future. But for example, for me, there's a lot of stuff I go back to, older brands and other things. Like I've been replaying through the Assassin's Creed games. I've been watching Sailor Moon with Jill. Those things to me have actually been a higher priority and more interesting than more Marvel or more Star Wars, because there's just so much of it.
Yeah, that's kind of the problem when you oversaturate the market with something. Is eventually it hits the point where people just don't care anymore. It's like Kevin Feige recently said he'd 80 years of the MCU. And it's kind of like, at what point are people just going to not care? And I think people have started to get that way with Star Wars. I'm not saying it's there yet, but I think they've started to feel like that. It's not the same as it was. I remember when The Force Awakens trailer came out, I remember the excitement, the hype that everyone, and I mean everyone, every Star Wars fan was hyped for that. It was so exciting. I don't know if there'll ever be a moment like that again, actually, in the Star Wars world.
Well, the moment you talked about was the Millennium Falcon in that.
Yeah. It was awesome. And do you want to know why it was awesome? Because we hadn't gotten 500 different Star Wars things.
Yeah.
It was, I don't know how many years it had been since the most recent stuff. And obviously there's stuff like Rebels and Clone Wars and stuff like that.
Well, and there were books.
There was books and, whatever. But in terms of a main Star Wars movie, the most recent one before Force Awakens was Revenge of the Sith.
Mm-hmm.
Which came out in 2006, I think it was, 2007?
I don't remember the exact year, but yeah, it was the early 2000s.
Right. So we're talking almost 10 years between Star Wars main films that finally everyone got to see something new and exciting. Now it's at the point where it's well, how about Andor? How about 2 seasons of Bad Batch? How about Obi-Wan? Mandalorian? Boba Fett? Oh, hey, how about this? Oh, why don't that?
Yeah, more spin-offs, Solo, Star Wars Story, Rogue One.
Right. It's gotten to the point where it's kind of
The High Republic.
Yes, the High Republic. That's
another
another one.
Example of it too.
Star Wars Visions.
Yeah, and Tales of the Jedi.
Yes,
and there's more coming out too.
Ahsoka's, which I'm actually excited for.
They have a whole slate.
Yeah.
The moment that I realized there was too much Star Wars was when they showed a slate on a screen in the Disney fashion of the MCU.
Yes,
that was the moment for me where I was like, "Oh, you're doing too much."
Right.
Because for me, I'm fine with picking and choosing. Mm-hmm. That's totally fine. I don't need to, I've always done that. I mean, for example, I couldn't read every Star Wars Legends novel.
Right.
I'm sure somebody did, but I didn't have the time to do that. There was a ton of them. I couldn't play every Star Wars video game back in that Legends timeline or whatever. I didn't have time for that. I played the ones I could and enjoyed, and I read the things I liked. Mm-hmm. And that was about it. And so I'm not trying to sound like a hypocrite, because maybe I'm complaining that's what I'm doing now. But I guess for me, I feel like I'm forced to do that now out of necessity and burnout. Whereas before, it was there's all these things I can enjoy from the last 20 years if I want. And the reason there was so many things was because it had been 20 years. Mm-hmm. They had been writing, honestly longer, they had been writing books since A New Hope. When you have stuff like that where there had been so many games, and you'd had Republic Commando and Knights of the Old Republic and all these different things, but it had been over decades, I feel like that's different to me, because now it's been relatively a small amount of time since Disney bought Star Wars, actually, but there's so much content, and it feels like a new thing comes out every day.
Right. And a good comparison for me is the 5th Indiana Jones movie. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't know if the movie's going to be good, So when it comes out, if it's garbage, I don't want everyone coming back to this and be like, well, hey, look what you said. But when I watched the trailer for that, I got so excited for that.
Right.
Like, I am so hyped for that movie. Do you know why? Because Indiana Jones 4 came out like 12 years ago.
Yeah.
So guess what? 12 years has passed since I have seen an Indiana Jones movie. Mm-hmm. I am excited.
And I don't think you have to like take that big of a break.
No, absolutely
you also
not.
don't have to make 20 things every single month.
Yeah, and that's the problem is I feel like every month, like you said, there's 20 different things come out.
Well, look at comic books. There's multiple ongoing Star Wars comic books all the time, always running.
Mm-hmm.
That's just another example of where Star Wars is just really throwing everything at the wall. And I understand you want to build up your timeline because you threw out all of Legends, but you chose to do that, even the good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so now they're like, well, we got to rebuild our universe. We got to like rebuild all these points in time. It's like, yeah, there was a ton of lore
already there
of stuff that was there, and if people cared, they could look into it.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't have to. I know you didn't care about a ton of Legends. That's fine. But it was there if people wanted to care. But now it almost feels necessary. You know, it'll be like, oh, you didn't watch this thing? Well, this ties into this way. And it's like, oh, so this is Marvel again.
Right.
This is, I didn't watch Captain Marvel 32, The Rise of Captain Marvel's Ass. So now, like, I'm not understanding who this villain is. I mean, you can even see that right now, Quantumania.
Yeah.
Ant-Man Quantumania, the main villain is from a spin-off TV show, or Netflix show or whatever. A Disney Plus show, whatever. Loki. Yes. The main villain was introduced in that.
Which was low-key good.
Right, and that's great. But it's, again, that same kind of thing where you have all these different things and it's now become almost like necessary reading. Where it's like, hey, if you want to understand this, you got to go get these other 12 things. That's kind of how I'm feeling with Star Wars, where if you want to care about a lot of projects, it's not as easy as just picking and choosing because you'll be like, who's that? What's that thing? I mean, even Cad Bane showing up in, I don't know if this is a big spoiler, it's been out for a while, in the Book of Boba Fett. Mm-hmm. You know, you had to have seen Clone Wars to care about that.
Right.
And that's not always bad, but it feels like they're doing that kind of everywhere. Oh, you don't know who Andor is? You didn't watch Rogue One?
Right.
And it's like, why do we have to tie everything into each other? Why can't a lot of these just be stories in the Star Wars universe? And if I want to watch a story about this, or read a story about this, or play a story about this, I can do that, and there's not a ton of necessary reading around it. Dude, literally, The Rise of Skywalker, Palpatine's return was announced in Fortnite.
Right.
In Fortnite.
Right.
And then, oh, it's great brand integration. No, it's not. It's obnoxious. And then you have to go pick up a visual dictionary and read every tiny little cliff note to understand, like, well, where was the Emperor? How did he get this stuff on Exegol?
Right, because somehow he returned.
What was his return? And you get what I'm saying?
Yeah,
like,
I do.
They're tying their world building into so many things, and I don't think you always needed that. You could have that in the past, and it existed. But if you didn't go read the obscure novel like The Legend of Luke's Ass, it didn't really matter because you could still enjoy episode 6 without it. It would just add on to it. I don't feel like that's the case anymore. I feel like it's all required.
Well, and that's the problem. I you know what I feel like with this? I feel like it's a season pass of like a Call of Duty thing, where it's something that if you do not interact with everything every single day, you're missing out on stuff. And that's the impression I get with Star Wars, is like, there's so many different avenues, there's so many different facets, there's so many different forms of media that Star Wars has been pushed into, that it's just hard to keep up with it. I don't have time to watch every movie, I don't have time to watch every show, I don't have time to read every book, I don't have time to read every comic series, I don't have time to play all the video games, I just don't have time to do everything.
Well, and you like, might if it was just your only interest.
Yes, exactly. If that was my only thing, fine. That's
my problem, though, is you and I have talked about this. I think that Disney, especially, but every brand holder, you know what they want now? They want your lifestyle to be their product.
Yes.
So they want you, Star Trek. They've been pumping out so many shows and stuff. They don't want you to just watch Picard. They want you to watch Picard and Discovery and Strange New Worlds and this and that and read this book and do this. It's like, no, I just want to watch Picard. Or I just want to watch this, or I just want to play this game. It's the same way with Star Wars. It's the same way with Marvel. I don't want my life to revolve around one world.
Right.
You know, like, I just don't...
It's boring.
It's fake. Like, I love fiction, but this is a fake world. Like, there's a lot of these worlds that capture my attention, and I have to be able to live in the real one and make money and provide for my family and, like, you know, go out to eat sometimes and go places. I don't have, you know, 50 hours a day to read the visual dictionary of The Last Jedi and pore over it and take notes. I just don't have that kind of time.
Right.
The only guys who have that kind of time are people whose job that is. Guys like Star Wars Theory.
Right.
Where, like, that's their thing. And, like, props to him, you know what I mean? Where he's got, like, a huge YouTube channel, one of the biggest Star Wars YouTubers ever. And he's, like, pouring into this stuff. Those, like, Star Wars scholars, awesome. But, like, I think Disney wants to treat it like we all have to be a Star Wars scholar. And for a lot of us, we also want to enjoy other stuff too.
It's not just like, oh, I like science fiction. It's, no, you have to like only Star Wars. You know, and my other problem with this is not only are they just oversaturating the market, but they're oversaturating the market with content that like people didn't ask for. Like, look, I get the community likes Andor. Fine. I'm not going to take that away from anyone. But like, let's be honest here. Out of all the Star Wars characters, why Andor?
Yeah, nobody was asking specifically for a Cassian Andor show about him.
No, and like, I'm not saying this needs to be made, but like, I think a show, maybe a prequel show about Yoda would be far more interesting than Andor. Yoda's much more of a main character to the Star Wars world than Cassian Andor was. But I'm saying, like, just the terms of the character itself.
Right.
I can think of so many characters off the top of my head that could have used a show more than him, that I think would have been much more interesting to the Star Wars world.
Well, you pointed this out to me. Your example of this was the High Republic.
Yeah.
Who cares about the High Republic? Like,
Right.
Is anyone sitting around like, well, what was this like here? Not really. No, most people weren't. What they were wondering is, what about Darth Revan? What about the Old Republic? Like the old Republic, you know, knights and stuff like that.
Yeah.
You know, people were interested in that time period. And instead they pushed that way back to make the High Republic. So,
Which I think the High Republic could work.
Yeah.
It could be interesting.
and parts of it are actually good.
Sure.
And parts of it are not good.
Sure.
But my point is just when you, well, your point, sorry, is when you start ignoring what people are asking for to give them, like, you think you want that, but here's this. And then that's the majority of the content you put out.
Yeah.
That's kind of a lot. Like, people wanted a sequel trilogy with Luke, Han, and Leia.
Yes.
They didn't get that.
No.
They were told, no, you really want this.
They got a first episode where it hyped it up that you'd think like, oh, hey, now we're finding Luke Skywalker.
Yeah.
And then it's like, oh, no, never mind.
Yeah, exactly. They were like, well, you want this, but we'll give you this. Oh, you want more about Obi-Wan. Well, let's give you this other stuff for years. Okay, fine, we'll give you Obi-Wan. And then, I know you love Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan didn't connect with everybody because I guess they didn't put as much time into its writing. That's something that I've read about it, is that it was pushed out a little quicker. And so now you're like, it almost feels like they're putting more effort into what they want to do and not much into what people want to see.
Right.
Does it feel like that to you?
It does.
Where it's like, well, we don't care about Luke Skywalker. Do whatever with him. But we care about Danzor Bewax here, our new character.
Right.
Our new OC. Like, he matters more. And it's like, let's push him. And it's kind of like people don't want Danzor Bewax. They want Luke.
Yeah.
You know, people don't want... I know Cassian worked, but people didn't ask for Cassian. They asked for, like, a Luke show.
Yeah.
Or they asked for what happened to Boba Fett. But a lot of the things people have asked for have been the things that have been more rushed.
Yeah.
Boba Fett, not as much seemed to go into the writing of it. Why? Why did way more effort go into The Mandalorian? I don't understand.
Yeah, I don't know.
And this is kind of a repeating pattern with them.
Well, it'd be like if with Indiana Jones they were like, oh hey, the fans want maybe a 6th movie to round out the trilogy. Hey, what about like a Marion TV show? It's like, no one wants this. Like,
Right.
I'm sorry. Like,
Even if it's good, they didn't ask
maybe the
for
show
it.
is good, but like, let's just make something that people want and then stick with it instead of just like busting out like, well, here's like 500 different shows and books and graphic novels and, oh hey, by the way, you have to read all of them.
Yeah.
In order to understand this thing. It's obnoxious.
Well, something you also said to me before off camera, and also something I think Liam Neeson was kind of hinting at with the taking away the mystery, is answering every question.
Yeah.
You know, you pointed out before, we were talking in the car about this, one of the most interesting things about the Force is not fully understanding how it works. I know that sounds convoluted. That sounds like, oh, well, then the writers don't get it either. Or, oh, there's no explanation. Dude, one of the things that's interesting in life is there will be things that are mysteries that we never fully discover. You know, maybe we get parts of them. Maybe we can kind of build our own theory out of it and kind of go off of that. But to kind of spell everything out for you, which I think Star Wars is doing, I mean, it started doing it with Rogue One. I like that movie a lot, but what if we talk about how they found out that hole was in the Death Star?
Right.
We don't really need a movie about that. It was a good movie.
It was a great movie.
So I'm not trying to complain about that specific movie. I'm just using it as a conceptual example of this is the kind of stuff they're doing, kind of like Cassian, like you said, where it's like, well, what if we take a look at the Rebels beforehand? It's like, oh yeah, what if there was like a secret Jedi helping the Rebels? No. You know the guy who died in Rogue One? Make it about him.
Right.
That kind of stuff where it's like, but why? Right. Why do that? That's not what people are asking to watch.
Well, that's always been one of the cool, fun things about the mystery of Star Wars, is stuff like, oh, how does that person levitate that person? The Force. How does that work? It's the Force.
Yeah, we'll tell you some.
It's like that's the explanation, and guess what? It worked.
Yeah.
Because people saw that and they were like, oh, that's kind of cool. This guy can levitate that thing. This guy can do force speed, which I know is only used in one movie. This guy can do this. This guy can do that with the Force. And guess what? We don't know why.
Yeah.
Or, you know, like you said with Rogue One, we don't know how they found that hole, but guess what they did?
And they could have written a book about it and no one would have cared. I would have been fine with it too. But
sure.
my point is just, I think they put a lot of focus and resources into answering questions people aren't really asking.
Right.
People aren't really caring that deeply about it. I mean, are you going to make another one about how all the Bothan spies died to get at the information of the second Death Star in Episode 6?
Yeah. That sounds really interesting. Wow.
Great. Awesome. Okay, cool.
Let's make a Salacious Crumb prequel movie.
Great.
Wow.
That's kind of what I'm saying, too, is it can work, but a lot of stuff people want to see isn't what's being explored, and what is being explored is questions that don't need to be answered that do ruin some of the mystery.
Yeah.
And I think that's unfortunate because at a certain point,
it's just not really exciting anymore.
No, and at a certain point, like, I don't care, like, why Luke's, like, ball size was, like, one smaller in, like, the next movie or whatever. Okay, whatever. It's like a minor detail. I don't care, like, why did the Millennium Falcon switch over to a new fuel converter? Don't care. Right. Doesn't matter to me.
Right.
I don't know. That's kind of what I'm saying. It's like, this is the kind of stuff, like, for a scholar. This is like the people who would pore over the Silmarillion or whatever in Lord of the Rings.
Yeah. It's
awesome.
Also like, I didn't care how Han got his name.
Or the story.
Like Han Solo. Like, I don't care.
Or the story about how C-3PO got his red arm.
I just saw him in Episode 7. He had a red arm. I was like, cool.
He must have lost his arm.
Interesting. There
got
you go.
a new arm. The end.
All right, watching the rest of the movie now.
And then the things that you wonder, the things you ask, like, well, how the heck did Maz Kanata or whatever get this lightsaber? Oh, that's a story for another time. Don't worry about it. Don't ask any questions about that. And it's like, well, how come you are answering every question I don't give a shit about? But then the things that are like big plot points, like, how'd the Emperor come back? Or how'd you get that lightsaber? Or what happened with that?
Did you read that dictionary?
And the dictionary wasn't even out yet.
Right.
So it would be things like, we'll tell you later. We'll buy this book later.
Right.
You're expecting your audience to do homework to keep up with your franchise.
That's stupid.
I got tired of homework in college. I don't need it here.
Right.
Anyway, let us know what you think in the comments down below. Is there too much Star Wars? What are your thoughts? And what kind of sequel do you think we should write to explore Nate's butthole circumference? I'm interested to hear the comments down below. I think the size of his force would be very interesting to examine. So let us know. Please be sure to leave a like and subscribe for more content. I'm sure we will do more Star Wars. It's just Star Wars has become something we care about. But I mainly want to talk about it when there's something exciting. The reason I wanted to talk about this is because I thought it was interesting that Liam Neeson himself had this opinion that we kind of share. So, interested to hear your thoughts. Have a fantastic day, and as always, everyone, stay shui.